welcome to my channel here. Welcome to Mary the Explorer channel, where we talk about everything, all things immigration tips to Australia, as well as lifestyle content here in Australia. If you're new on this channel, please feel free to subscribe, like, and share. Click on the notification bell button just to know when we release and drop new content regarding all things Australia. So today's episode will be just more about more on a Q&A to talk about different things about Australia, cost of living. A couple of new migrants reached out to me to just do this video on a bit of Q&A on the different things that they could possibly experience. So cost of living, what is superannuation? A couple of you might think superannuation is something really grand and big and off the top of the moon, but I'm just going to be simplifying it and demystifying a lot of things, definitions and concepts and big words that you might be seeing all over the internet. So the first Q&A, what is superannuation? So when you first move into Australia as a new migrant, superannuation is a portion of your income that is put away by your employer towards your pension or your retirement years. I believe the retirement year cutoff years is from about 65, I believe. So if you're about 20 something years moving to Australia, you can imagine how much your superannuation contribution will yield and accumulate over the years before you get to your retirement years. So your employer is mandated by the government to make a 10% minimum contribution towards your superannuation. You also, as an employee, you're also entitled, if you want to make voluntary extra or additional superannuation contribution towards your superannuation. So in simple layman terms, superannuation is pretty much your pensions like you're pretty much used to in your home country. So in my home country, it is classified or categorized as pension. So it's not a big word like you use here in Australia. So out of your paycheck could come in weekly or fortnightly or monthly, whatever the pay frequency is from your organization or as per agreed in your employment contract. 10% of your pay before tax is made by your employer. 10% minimum contribution is made by your employer towards your superannuation contribution. So if you want to know more about this, just head over to the www.ato, which is the Australian Taxation Office.com.au, just to know more about superannuations and really what it's all about. But it's not a big word, and if you're mixing those those names on your first payslip, just know that it's your employer that's making that contribution towards your pensions or your retirement age. The second question I got was, can I use my driver's license here in Australia, my international driver's license? Yes, you can use your international driver's license, I think up to about 3 to 6 months. But as soon as you settle in, I recommend that you get an Australian driver's license. You go through the Australian, there's some local Australian drivers schools, driving school rather, that can teach you on how to drive. I will do an in-depth series on driver's license, how you can obtain an Australian driver's license upon your arrival or 3 months from when you arrive. Those are pretty much things that you might want to consider. But yes, you can use an international driver's license to drive while you're in Australia. The third question that I get is, as an international student, how many hours can I work? Prior to July, I believe July of 2022, so international students on the visa 500 could only work about 20 hours per week, and that was pre-pandemic, pre the COVID pandemic. Post the COVID pandemic, it was increased. The working hours for students was increased to 40 hours per week, just to meet up with the skills shortage demand that is currently ravishing Australia, and hence why you're migrating to Australia anyways. So but now the demand for skills has gone up, and we are severely having shortages in Australia. So now it has been changed by the Home Affairs Minister she has changed it to unlimited and unrestricted working hours here in Australia. So, as an international student, you are entitled to work on restricted hours. However, you need to keep your eye on the ball, just so you know that this relapse to the rule is gonna expire by February of next year. So you might want to keep an eye on your studies. So even if your employer is wanting you to work on limited hours, you're making more money, you need to also keep your eyes on your studies and make sure that you do not flunk or mess up your grades just because you have access to working on limited hours, because if you do that, you'll be in breach of your working visa. So I'm not a MIRA agent, but just from what I gather from my research, you need to also, keep your eyes on your grades as well, so it doesn't, it doesn't decline because you're getting more hours. Another question that I get frequently is, what are the employment types that you have here in Australia? I mean, employment contracts. So the popular ones that you have, usually you have the casual employment, you have the permanent full-time employment, and you have the permanent part-time employment. These employments all vary and they have various meanings and implications. The casual employment means that you are working with the customer or working with your employer for certain amount of hours at their discretion. So you might not get a frequent roster or rostering that says you work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's only if they need you, you are a backup staff to come in and work when the permanent staff, full-time staff is sick. Now, the permanent full-time staff is a full-time employee recognized by the organization, and they allocate hours. You have set hours, you have set rosters or set rostering, and you are contracted for 38 hours or 40 hours a week. So those are, exact commitment that the employer is committed to giving you per week. Sometimes it can be flexible. I mean, in terms of the rostering or the hours, it can be flexible. They can pick and choose any of the 5 days out of 7 days in a week. For part-time, it's usually 3 days or 2 days. Anything less than 38 hours a week is what the employer is committed to giving you as the number of hours that you can work for them. So the permanent full-time, remember, is 38 hours or 40 hours in a week for 5 days in a week. So anything less than 38 hours, you're definitely going on part-time. So in the past, I've done part-time hours for 21 hours in a week or 24 hours in a week. So in a day, it's about 7.5 hours. So plus your lunch, and then you multiply that by the number of days you would like to work. Sometimes it's predictable, sometimes it's negotiable. You can negotiate these terms and conditions with your employer. Another question that I get is, I'd like to open a bank account in Australia. What are the recommended banks that new migrants can make use of? I believe that new migrants can make use of so many banks that are available, but I think that there are top 3 banks that are pretty much accessible anywhere, whatever state, irrespective of the state or suburb or locality that you might find yourself in upon arrival. Common banks or popular banks that are used. This content is purely not sponsored by any bank or any of the big names I'm calling in here, but I think that the top 3 banks are Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, and NAB Bank. I currently use CommBank. They're pretty reliable and pretty accessible. What you want to look out for is, where are the places you really want to go to, that your jobs are around, your house is around, what bank has the widest reach. And I think CommBank has a wider reach than most banks. Any of the top 3 banks really have wide reach, like ANZ and NAB Bank. NAB Bank is pretty multicultural in terms of what services and products they have available for new migrants. I think that NAB Bank has more reach within the multicultural society and multicultural groups here in Australia. So you might want to have a peek around those 3. If you find yourself in the rural or regional part of Australia, you need to do your research and your survey to be able to see what banks are available in those places. Because aside from the top 3, you have local banks in these regional areas that also have massive reaches. or massive reach just within that regional area. So you might want to focus on those banks rather than the top three big banks that I've mentioned. So for example, if you're in South Australia, there's a local bank. There's so many local banks, microfinance banks that are, just easily accessible. When you move from point A to point B, you've seen two of their ATM machines. So you might want to look at that just so you can save on cost on any, card